everybody. It's great to see some familiar faces back again to the Series 2 of the Client Experience Programme. A very warm welcome and thank you for joining. Obviously, those of you that have been to the programme before know that this programme is designed for in-house counsel by in-house counsel. We validated this series programme content and got feedback on what in-house counsel wanted to see in the programme, and so I'm delighted today to be able to share with you the Strategic Planning for Your Legal Function webinar hosted by Joanne Wakeford, who is the Chief Client Officer of Dentons In-House Solutions, and Joanne's going to tell you a little bit more about herself in a moment. I would say, as we are a small group, please put your cameras on, come off mute, share your views, have your say, ask your questions, put opinions into the chat. It will be great to hear from you. And as I said, because it's a small group, we can have a really nice, intimate discussion. So thanks very much for joining us. And Joanne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Judith. Welcome, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good to see you. As Judith mentioned, my name is Joanne Wakeford. Hello, thanks for putting your cameras on. Good to see you. I am Chief Client Officer with Dentons In-House Solutions, and we are a legal operations consultancy within Dentons that works with in-house teams all around the world to help them optimize the way that they deliver legal services to the business. So when I'm not busy chasing after my teenager or my dog, or busy trying to perfect the macaron, by the way, those are Earl Grey ganache infused, blackberry chocolate, raspberry lemonade, and a bourbon salted chocolate macaron. In case you're hungry, now's the time to grab a snack. But when I'm not doing all those things, I am equally passionate about helping law departments around the world to really tell their story and really demonstrate their team's value. And strategic planning has a really important role to play in all of that. So today we're going to share with you some tips and tools that will help you along your planning journey, regardless of where you may be. So why are we having this conversation today? I am really fortunate to be able to have conversations with our clients all around the world from different industries, from different sizes, jurisdictions. And of those hundreds of client conversations, what is remarkable to me is how these pain points that you see on the screen are consistent, regardless of the size of company, regardless of the location or the size of the law department. So if anything, if any of these points on the screen cause you a bit of stress, I want to assure you, you are in very, very good company. Things like, we hear people say that legal is just not appreciated by the business. That demonstrating that value or that perception of the law department is often perceived as the department of no, N-O, as the department, as opposed to what it should be, which is the department of K-N-O-W or knowledge. So that's something that's probably one of the top themes that we hear. We often hear, of course, that you're in a constant state of firefighting. There's no time to be more proactive. Your team is so thinly stretched. Every year, your budget is probably being reduced, but the workload is constantly increasing. There was a statistic by Thomson Reuters in a survey they did, Legal Department Operations Index. 58% of those surveyed indicated that their law department experienced an increase in workload over 2020, while 29% faced a decrease in budget. So I'm sure that number is even more so now. And really just not enough time in the day to focus on the priorities that will make you more efficient and effective in the long term, right? It's that urgent versus the important. And so it's finding that balance. It can feel completely overwhelming and frustrating. And it can be a challenge to know where to start. And even trying to find the time on your desk, probably a tiny little corner right over here, where you can find the time to focus on this. But it doesn't have to be. We're going to talk a little bit about how strategic planning can help you with this. And if you can find the bandwidth, so if you can find the time to just take a pause, to take a step back and think through this, this is really about thinking about how you're going to go from point A, where you are now, to point B. That's really all a plan is about, right? There's certainly no one size fits all approach either. We're going to talk about some ideas here today. They may be relevant to you. You may want to flex them based on your organizational culture, your size, the evolution of your company. For example, if you're in hypergrowth mode, you're going to approach this process much differently with a heavy focus on being agile and delivering more quickly, just given how fast those organizations can change. Of course, and you'll probably hear this too much from me, so I'm just going to apologize in advance, but I cannot stress the importance of communication. It is absolutely vital. Just when you think you've probably communicated enough, and I mean to your internal stakeholders, your team, your business unit leaders, you probably need to do it just a little bit more. And we're going to touch on why that's important. And at the end of the day, that the goal here isn't to produce a shiny plan with lots of corporate colors and lots of fancy words. It's not the paper that's produced at the end of the day. It's the process. And I've heard from countless who have undertaken this exercise without being mindful about the process. And now they're struggling to gain momentum and to get support for implementation. So it's a journey, and hopefully today we can give some guidance for you that you can adapt for your organization. But let's just start with a quick poll, if you don't mind me throwing up our first poll. Just wondering, for those on the call today, have you a strategic plan in place? So it's a yes or no question. So just let us know, do you have a plan in place? I think we've done this before, and the results are generally split, but we'll just give everyone a few minutes here to jump in. All right, I think we're split again, which just doesn't surprise me. All right, I think we can probably close the poll. Eve, thank you very much.
There we go.
The results. So wonderful. So, all right, so 40% have a plan and 60% don't. Okay, let's, because as I will talk about shortly, there's an evolution. So a plan can mean more than, there's an evolution to having a plan. So let's do one more poll. The question is, what aspect of the planning and implementation process do you find the most challenging? Neva's going to launch that for us in a moment.
There we go.
Thank you so much, Neve. So is it having the resources and the time? I mentioned that tiny little spot on your desk that you might be able to devote to thinking through this. Is it really, do you find a challenge in getting stakeholder buy-in, getting their support, and ultimately leveraging them to help manage that change? But change management is a whole conversation in itself, and one that we should probably have, but is that a challenge for you? Prioritization, do you struggle to be able to prioritize in all the different projects and legal work that needs to be done across the department? Maybe sometimes it comes down to whomever has screamed the loudest, which we often hear. Or is it having access to data and really understanding, you know, how can I build a plan? And if I don't know how much work we have, volumes of it, who's doing it, what's it taking, you know, that kind of information. All right, so I think we are good, Neve, to share.
Yeah, we look good. Okay,
Yep.
great.
Perfect. All right, so resources and time, 60% of you, not surprised. Certainly that is in a premium these days. So followed by, it looks like managing change and access to data are completely split. So that's great, good to know, and we'll touch on these points for sure. All right, thank you for that, I appreciate that. So just take a minute to talk about the benefits of the planning process before we get started. But earlier today, actually it was today, there was a report released by the World Economic Forum and their community of chief economists. And 7 out of 10 consider a global recession to be at least somewhat likely. And if you joined us last week, actually, there was a great session from some of our former GCs at Denton's, where they talked a little bit about how to prepare for a recession or a business downturn. So you'll know then if you attended that session. If not, we have a white paper we can share with you, that getting your department organized, owning your own data, demonstrating your value, and planning and prioritizing for the future is more important now than ever. And the strategic planning process is actually a really important tool to help you with all of that. So number one, let's get prepared for what the next few months hold into the next 2023. But beyond that, but also very directly related, the planning process addresses one of the key questions I'm often asked about, which is, how can we establish greater alignment with the business and really demonstrate our value? And my response is always, if you don't have a plan, let's start there. And I'll explain why that makes sense. But by nature of the process of engaging with the business in this way, you are demonstrating your focus on aligning with their needs and priorities. So again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. But the other thing is, most corporate functions, if you think about it, within an organization will have a strategic plan, right? HR, sales, finance, but legal for a long time has been able to avoid this because of the nature of your work. It's unpredictable, it's complicated. How can you possibly plan around this? Well, the answer is you can't always, and you need to be flexible, but you can avoid the predictable challenges. And by simply having a glance into what is ahead for the business and your internal customers, you can be more strategic about your limited resources. You may find out that June might be a horrible time to kick off a big operational project because of the upcoming major transaction, right? Thinking through how do you manage what you have. But really the impact on the team as well is quite remarkable. And I have seen this firsthand. Not only do people want to be heard, but they really want to change. They inherently want to contribute to make things better. And they want to be part of the change as opposed to having that change happen to them. Planning also equips you with the data that you need for any additional budget request, right? So now you've gone through the process, and we'll explain the process, but you've gone through that exercise, you understand what needs to be fixed. Now you've got hard data to back that up. And my personal favorite, because we professionals just simply love to take on more than we can chew, having a plan keeps you focused. Ultimately, if it doesn't matter to the business, it shouldn't matter to the law department. All right, so poll number 3, our last poll of the day. If you have a strategic plan, are you adapting it in light of current economic conditions? So I think this question applies to about half of you, if I'm correct. Love to hear your thoughts if you're thinking about that plan and looking at how you might be able to adapt it based on what we're seeing in the news and what we're hearing. All right, no responses thus far. Oh, let's give it some time. Okay, here we go. They're coming in. Let's give it a few more minutes here for people to respond. Yes or no, are you thinking about that plan? All right, I think that might be it based on the number of responses. So let's share that. And once again, 50-50. Half of you are looking at it and half of you haven't yet. So again, good time to have this conversation. So as I mentioned earlier, planning really is a journey. And you know, if you don't have a plan yet, or even if you do have a plan yet, there certainly are obviously ways to evolve and to improve upon it. There's a great resource through the Association of Corporate Counsel called the Maturity Model for the Operations of a Legal Department. They cover all the disciplines of a legal department, including strategic planning. And they set out sort of the evolution that you might go through with each of these sort of disciplines or functions. So early stage, no plan yet, firefighting, no metrics, no defined goals, really just, you know, obviously struggling to get through the day-to-day. As you move along, perhaps you have a plan in place. There might be engagement with internal stakeholders. You're starting to set out accountabilities for the team. The plan might be communicated. Maybe it's not as part of your communication, you know, thinking and planning, but certainly it's known. And again, you're reporting against that with key metrics. But as you move to more advanced stage, that process of the planning is annual, and it takes place before the budget submission cycle, which allows you to think through, okay, this is what the resources that we need in order to accomplish what we've set out. Obviously, regular reviews of that plan, and also that, importantly, I would say, because this is how you get stuff done, is that there are objectives are aligned to individuals' performance reviews and their plans, and making sure that's where the accountability, that's where the rubber hits the road. And of course, regular updates. I might add an extra line to this, which would suggest that taking that plan and making it part of your communication strategy, which we're going to talk a little bit about as well. So good segue to word on communications. As you start this process, as you start to think about, okay, we really need to get ourselves a strategic plan for the department, one of the most important considerations is to think about how you plan to socialize your intentions across your key internal stakeholders, your team, and any other important audience. When you think about that, strategic planning is really about, aside from the legal work that you'll do, about identifying the change that you want to see and implementing that change. And of course, anytime that you are looking at changing the way people work together, interact together, receive or give instructions, all of this can cause people to shut down out of fear of change, right? And this is often overlooked and can lead to project failure. A great example is with workflow intake. So the way in which you receive requests from the business into the department. there's a significant appetite right now, and has been over the past few years, to streamline that process, to be able to triage the work, track what's coming in, how long is it taking, who is it doing, who's doing it, and all those sorts of things. But when you start to think about how that might impact the way that the business interacts with legal, or legal interacts with the business, there's some hesitation, right? It's like, well, I don't want to ask my internal client to do this differently. I've got a great relationship with them, and this is how we work together. So you need to help people understand the why, right? When you talk about how these things might impact the way that they're doing, there's an important element to making them understand the why. Helping them to understand why you're embarking on this journey. So thinking about how you're communicating with your audiences, thinking about who are those key audiences that you want to communicate to. This is essentially like building a mini communications plan. Again, communications is often underrated as part of everything to do within the law department, and being able to demonstrate the work that you do. But if you were to identify a couple of audiences, let's look at the legal team, for example, as a particular audience. Your goal there is to establish early buy-in with them and engagement, while essentially establishing the sense of urgency for change, right? Because they're going to want to support you as part of these goals and the activities that you'll do for the year. So obviously thinking through your strategy and tactics, how you communicate to them, what will you say? You're going to want to focus on tying that back to corporate vision and strategy. Anytime you can connect to what the legal department is doing as it relates to corporate vision and strategy and corporate goals, you'll demonstrate your alignment with the business. You're going to want to focus on the why and what is the rallying message. We need to, for example, at an organizational level, we're focused on transformation and change, and we as a law department cannot be an outlier in this effort. Thinking about how do you leverage your senior leaders within your team to help toe the line and be ambassadors of this overall messaging. So just think through, in terms of, as you kick off this project, the importance of internal communications. So this is our roadmap for our discussion today. We're going to talk a little bit about how we get from point A to point B. And the first step is really thinking about your current state and assessing your current state. So understanding everything from corporate priorities to what's happening around us in the horizon and the economy, geopolitical and economic considerations. What other data can we gather to help inform that current state situation? Then we're going to look at future state. What should legal look like? What is the role of the law department? What should you and shouldn't you be doing as a team? And then from there, aligning on some key priorities. Actually building the plan itself is really the easy part. That's the roadmap that will take you from where you are now to your future state. Obviously building out everything from accountabilities and timeframes. Everything up until this point is the easy part. The difficult part is around implementation, right? So this is the hard work that you'll need to define specific tactics and to move that forward. And once again, making sure that there's consistent communication throughout. So as you consider your current state, again, you're going to want to collect information from multiple sources. Think about what internal stakeholders you want to be connecting with to get a better understanding of their perceptions of the law department. And the order in which you have those conversations is entirely up to you and your organizational culture. Is it your CEO before your team? So think through that in terms of your process. And I want to make a point too, that since you've already communicated to the internal stakeholders your intentions, they know that the process has begun. So this shouldn't be a surprise to them. Think about this exercise as a bit like, when you take your car into the shop and they run a diagnostic for you and tell you what's wrong. This is essentially what we're doing. We're looking under the hood to conduct an assessment of how your department fares across the people, process, and technology spectrum. And we're also going to use this process as a way to understand, what does that road look like ahead for us for the legal department in terms of our priorities? And data is absolutely important. And I know that's a challenge and certainly came up in the survey. Obviously, you want to be able to get some data that you can use to either benchmark against peers or to leverage that to demonstrate need for resources. But it can certainly become an endless search. So think about, where do you draw the line and what is good for now? And obviously consider external factors, obviously, as we talked about, things like regulatory changes and other horizon scanning. So I'm going to ask Judith and Niamh to just keep an eye on the chat to make sure that we don't have any questions, but please jump in and interrupt me if we do. So once again, understanding your current position is again, entirely up to you. I prefer to start with the team first. I want to understand what's working and not working well before I have the conversations with our clients. So this is about looking under the hood, if you will. And even if you're not new to the law department, or if you're the role of general counsel, and even if you're not new to the role, this can be a really helpful exercise, as some things just aren't evident, especially with a larger team. So think about also being very inclusive of everyone on your team, regardless of role. You'll find out some pretty interesting stuff depending on who you speak with across the department, in terms of maybe some of the inefficiencies that they're focused on that are impacting people down the road and other roles across the organization or across the department. But also because engaging everyone at the front end will make them feel that you're taking a very inclusive approach, of course, right? So one way to do this, and we've done this before, is to just conduct an anonymous survey across the team. 3 questions: what are we doing well? What do our customers expect from the law department? And where do you think our customers would like to see improvement? So our internal customers, of course. So easy to get that data. Anonymous lets people feel like they can be a little bit more candid and more open with the responses. And again, it'll be a very helpful way to see, understand where your position is. Now, on top of that, there's value in thinking about spending time one-on-one with your team, perhaps maybe your senior leaders or others, individuals across the department, to give you insight into their changes and needs and priorities. But it really does demonstrate your commitment to their personal growth, and the role that they'll play in planning for your priorities and implementing those. And as we all understand that sort of the great transition era, or the great resignation era, and how can we engage people around us, this is a wonderful way to start having those conversations with them, to demonstrate obviously your interest in their future success, but also that they're part of the team moving forward. So thinking questions like, what kind of work occupies the bulk of your time? What are your current frustrations? Just getting a good sense of where they currently sit. I like to ask the question, can you give us a few recent examples of successes? Because that information is really helpful to think about when you're talking about demonstrating your contributions and your value as a department. Thinking about how can we highlight some of these successes as a team? How can we use this information? So if you're having a conversation, you might as well throw that in there as well. So on top of the conversations with your team, you're going to think about building out a complete picture with some data. Now, this again is whatever you can get access to. Thinking about your current spend, looking at it internal versus external. What is that as a percentage of revenue by strategic priority or by business unit? What is your current FTE headcount? Hours, do you have that information in terms of time being spent? Some people track hours. What kind of work is being worked on? What type of work? What is the complexity of that? And even things like number of law firm relationships. Certainly, I think as we go into what is potentially a recession, I think looking at how we can get greater value from our law firm relationships, I think there's a conversation to be had around that as well. So again, think about what kind of data you can get access to. If you're struggling, ask your finance partner. Certainly, they might have information, but also your outside counsel. They might be helpful in certainly providing things like spend. Now, as you're building this picture, you might dig a little bit deeper into some aspects, such as, what is our current skills and expertise across the team? What do we have that might be specialized? Think about things like, how are we currently keeping track of regulatory changes? Do we have a system in place for that? Do we have centralized resources and precedents? Do we have a system set up to track and engage with our law firms to get regular feedback from them, or rather for us to give them feedback as well? It goes both ways, 360. And thinking about how you can collect as much data as you possibly can. And benchmarking is a really important strategy. So great benchmark resources available to help you build your business case for resources. The Association of Corporate Counsel certainly and CLOC have data on things like FTEs, legal department size, salaries, spend, and they often break it down by company size or by jurisdiction. So really terrific information to have access to there. Major Lindsay in Africa, I know, has salary data, and I think they also break that down by jurisdiction as well. So thinking, of course, and Gartner has great data as well. We actually, as Denton's In-House Solutions, offer a value-add diagnostic conversation. So we look across the full spectrum of your law department. So certainly if that's of interest to you, that's something that we can support you with. Now, once you've collected all of that insight and priorities on your department, now is a really important time to engage with the business and your internal customers on their priorities. This might be more obvious if you're a smaller law department or if you're the only in-house counsel, but it is the most direct way to ensure alignment with the business and to truly demonstrate your position as a strategic partner. This will help you to shape your direction, to begin to anticipate their legal needs, and really allowing you, by simply having these conversations, you're getting closer to the front end of these discussions and these activities. And again, you've already communicated your intentions, so setting up these conversations with key internal stakeholders would be a good next step. And while it can obviously be done by an online survey, you're going to get far better insights and develop much better relationships by spending time in these sessions on a one-to-one basis. So asking simple questions like, what are your priorities over the next 3, 6, and 12 months? What impediments do you foresee in accomplishing these goals, and what can the department do to support you in accomplishing these goals? Now, while this is a conversation you'd have as part of your planning process, please do not only have these conversations once a year. Priorities shift and change, and again, this is an important opportunity for you to not only stay close, stay connected, regular visits, your cup of coffee, whatever it takes to just check in, say, hey, just wanted to check in how things are progressing with project X, or where do you see project Y going? It really does reinforce effective collaboration with the business when you're making that connection. Now, it's also helpful to have a conversation around service feedback, right? To help reveal, maybe there's opportunities for you to reveal some operational opportunities to create some efficiencies, right? So understanding from the business, what is it they find less valuable? What do they find most valuable? How do we perhaps help execute your business, or how do we help hinder? How do we hinder your business? How can we assist you in making better decisions? All these kinds of questions that really help you to shape what might be really frustrating the business. And when the business is frustrated because of whatever reason they might be contributing, it might be poor processes or lack of technology, but that frustration leads to that perception of no, the department of no. So what can you do to uncover in those conversations to support future planning? A couple quick tips, of course, as you have these conversations around feedback, you might not exactly like what you hear. Certainly, it's important to keep an open mind. You will certainly be impressed with your colleagues' thoughtful insights and suggestions. And I have again, I've seen this firsthand. Think about, though, as you do this, sending an agenda in advance so they've actually got time to think about this and put some forethought into it. Think about recording the conversation, or if not appropriate, think about bringing somebody else in with you, a paralegal or support staff, to help you in these conversations, to take notes so that you can focus on the individual you're connecting with. And it's going to be okay and important to ultimately acknowledge that you might need to prioritize, of course. But by understanding what is likely coming ahead for the business, it's going to allow you to be more proactive with what limited resources you have, right? Or if necessary, to seek additional support. And also ask, do they know of anybody else in the business that might be seeking legal support over the next year? You never know where that might lead. But ultimately, again, when we talk to clients about how to align with the business, how to have effective collaboration, how to exceed internal client expectations, it's these conversations that is the starting point. It has a tremendous impact on your relationship. It's an opportunity for you to build those connections, but also conveniently prepares them for change, right? So the benefit of planning with your stakeholders is you're getting their early buy-in for future change, because you've asked them, what improvements would you like to see? Now they feel heard. They're more likely to adapt to that change, and overall it improves your relationship. So horizon scanning, again, thinking through what is in the big picture. Certainly think about asking your law firms, ask them for their take on your biggest risks and any regulatory challenges. Maybe they can conduct periodic briefings on market trends or legislative changes or economic and sector changes. So getting whatever data you can to help inform your thinking. Once again, think about associations like ACC and CLOC, lots of great information that they have, and also even at the sector level, which can be helpful. And think through, again, across the business. Are there others across the business that can give you data and insight that can help organize your direction of travel? So you've collected all of this information, certainly a lot of data, insights, perspectives, along with your personal insights. You'll now need to think about how do we synthesize all this? And you'll probably start to create different themes and buckets for feedback. Like maybe there's an opportunity for greater collaboration, or maybe responsiveness might need to be focused on, or expertise, etc. But a SWOT analysis is a great way to get this on a single page. We've all heard of SWOTs. There's lots of different tools out there. Certainly, I prefer this one. It's pretty straightforward. It highlights two really important things. One of which, your strengths and opportunities, where you can gain an advantage, and then also your weaknesses and threats, where you need to defend or protect or prioritize. But the SWOT in itself, so the exercise is obviously important, but having the actual SWOT is a really helpful tool to actually share with your leadership, to highlight what are you doing really well and where do you need to resources to make improvements. And again, it's all based on data. It's all based on your understanding and conversations with your team and across the business. So thinking through the SWOT analysis, just looking at your internal strengths, right? Again, what kind of specialized skills do we have? Do we have a positive relationship with the business? What is team morale like and engagement? I was doing some sessions a couple of weeks ago for clients, and I was asked, can you describe, based on the conversations you're having with clients, what is the single most important attribute for a high-performing legal team? And I would have to say team morale and engagement is so huge. It is absolutely that team collaboration where lawyers across the department can say, I know we have each other's back. That is huge. So if you can mark that bucket in your SWOT, congratulations. That is incredible and good to have. Thinking about your weaknesses, again, are there any skill gaps? Is our capacity too thin vis-a-vis what we've seen benchmarked in other organizations? I think also struggling, sometimes a lot of department struggles to truly know the business. Do you have that perspective of the products or services you offer? Does the team really know that, or is there room for improvement there? And then thinking externally, right? What strategic priorities could we help to advance? How is the team supporting revenue generation for the organization? Are there any trends that might present opportunities for the organization? And then finally, thinking about threats. Of course, that is obviously top of mind for many of us now. Are we keeping track of the impact of any geopolitical and economic risk? What does that mean? How do we prepare for that? What are our potential threats that we need to be thinking through? Now, once you've gathered all of these questions, leveraging, again, all the data that you've gathered, it might be quite clear to you where your top line goals should fall. It should be as part of this exercise. So now, again, we've got this robust picture of where we need to support the business going forward, along with what's working and not working. As you think about the future state of the organization, again, it's establishing roughly where you need to go. I like to think of it as the roadmap for your vacation road trip, right? It's going to be how you're going to get from home to the beach with the 5 toddlers in a station wagon or whatever complication you can think of. What does that look like? And to do this, you're going to give some thought to what is the role of the legal function? What is your vision or mission? How do you add value? What is ultimately the directional North Star for the department? At the same time, you need to give some thought to what role you will not play. I have spoke to a few GCs recently who members of their team, or they do get involved in tasks that clearly belong to other departments, things like writing or proofreading. Because obviously you're good at it, but that's not what you should be doing. So what are the things that we should not be doing? And then thinking through what are the top level goals that have surfaced to the top, the big rocks that have become obvious, and ensuring how do we align with the department, the leadership team on these top level priorities and secure areas of investment. And again, now that you've had these conversations, you've have this perspective, now's a good time to communicate again to your team. Thinking about, a high level snapshot of some of this feedback. Keep it positive though, of course, but use this to continue to establish that sense of urgency. If you go away into a vacuum and don't come back, people are going to wonder what's going on, what things were said about them, all those sorts of horrible things. So you're going to want to make sure you communicate back. So again, thinking about your role as a function will really help to align the team, help to drive priorities going forward. And it becomes that, as I said earlier, that directional North Star as you decide and as the team decides, how are you going to be spending your time? And some law departments, and maybe many of you, have a vision, a mission, and a purpose, which is fantastic, especially if it's often referred to or referenced. But unfortunately, most often these things are forgotten or not well known or rarely even used outside the department. So thinking about what is that North Star, the purpose of all of this is to make sure everyone is aligned around what you understand that you will deliver to the business and how you will do that. It becomes a precedent really for how you decide as a team that you're going to interact with each other, interact with the business. It becomes those guiding principles. And of course, it should be aligned to your corporate goals and your strategy and corporate statements, including things like vision. But it could be something as simple as the legal department will be XYZ, insert whichever values or attributes you'd like, agile, collaborators, solutions-oriented, whatever, so that we can support the business with ABC, world-class support, mitigating risk, revenue growth, whatever. And I'm going to pause right here for a second because this is certainly having the conversation is important, but this in itself can sometimes become a painful navel-gazing exercise and result in just very vague statements with generalities and feel-good messages that disappear into someone's inbox and we never see it again. Ultimately, you need to be able to answer the question, what do our clients need from the law department? And if you've asked your team about this, remember earlier on in the conversations that you're having with the team, you can likely come to some agreement. But whatever it is, again, it has to align with that corporate messaging. So the challenge is you've gone right through this conversation, you've discovered all these things, and now you're sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, that spot on my desk that I had to deal with this earlier is the same size, but I've uncovered tons and tons of priorities. And of course, just like I said earlier, like all of us, you'll want to do them all, and you want to get them all done now, and you want to achieve perfection. But you will need to ruthlessly prioritize. Otherwise, you'll simply face burnout, turnover, obviously even potentially disappointment or dissatisfaction from the business. Trying to accomplish too much and focusing on things that aren't realistic really has bad, detrimental, I would say, impact on the team and negatively will impact your perception. So separate and apart from the legal work that you will need to resource and thinking through how do we do that, what type of work can be done in a different way, how do we manage that work, think about how you can really focus on the quick wins in terms of some of the operational efficiencies. In the first few months of your plan, you're going to want to be able to demonstrate impact and momentum. So what are those quick wins that you can focus on? So even if you're in a small, mid-sized, or even a larger law department, thinking about just taking the opportunity to have these kinds of conversations with your team, your senior leaders across the department, where you can align on your role and your priorities. You might even consider doing this facilitated by a third party, allows you to really focus on the conversation. But I have to say, if you're the department leader or the individual leading this initiative for your law department, this is your conversation, this is your program. So you need to stay closely involved. You need to be seen as the project owner and sponsor. And as you're thinking about your offsite, be really strategic about how to approach this. We've probably all been in at least one or two of these in our lives where nothing was accomplished. Maybe we had a really nice dinner with colleagues and some wine. So thinking about making the most of your time. And there's a great article in Harvard Business Review by Bob Frisch and Logan Chandler that talks about offsites that work. So thinking about what is it that you want to accomplish with this meeting. Maybe you're going to have two sets of meetings in terms of dealing with the what we need to prioritize, and then another session to talk about the how. Think about who's in attendance, minimize what materials you send, please. We all know we don't have time to read too much information. Maybe think about sharing that SWOT that you've done, some of the feedback, maybe an industry article or tool. And I'll plug it again, Judith, you'll be pleased, such as the great tool and checklist that Dentons has put together on how departments can plan through a recession. So that might be good content to have, but really have a structured agenda and make sure you stay focused. Sample agenda on the screen as well. Again, just let's spend some time talking through how do we prioritize, and how do we ultimately establish KPIs to make sure that we're aligned on that and successful. Now, when you're talking about prioritization, if you don't have a common way to measure, it can be very subjective and based on personal preference, right? So when thinking about voting on what to prioritize, it's good to have some agreed upon criteria. So we use this kind of matrix without the pretty pictures, I assure you, to support clients in looking at their priorities. So in this case, we're using complexity to implement versus benefit to the organization, use cost versus benefit, et cetera. But using this kind of matrix really takes that personal preference out of the conversation. And you can think through, how you can ultimately focus on where you're going to have the deepest impact or that low hanging fruit. If you're a solo GC and looking for an additional perspective on this, happy to have that conversation. Or if you're simply looking for insights from other law departments as well, happy to share that. So now, as you consider your plan, think about it's a tool, as I mentioned earlier, ultimately a roadmap for your vision and what you'd like to accomplish. It is not an execution or a project plan, that comes later, but it is thinking through that vision. And what it actually looks like is not as important. Keep in mind that the effort that you've conducted up until this point is quite significant. Putting the actual paper together, let's not exhaust all our resources on creating that perfect plan, but you might want to think about mimicking corporate language just to, again, make that connection, to refer to those corporate priorities to demonstrate your alignment. Think about, again, who needs to see what level of detail, because different audiences are going to want different information. Again, this is about making sure that you communicate what your plan is, what you'll get done. And really, ultimately, what it does is demonstrate that you've gone through a very robust process to identify that these are the gaps that we need to focus on in order to support the organization, in order to help grow revenue and mitigate risk, right? And once again, think about another communication check-in, reporting out to your team at a minimum to share the results or insights from that offsite, that priorities discussion that you had, and just talk about what next steps are. So here's a sample template we've put together. We can make it available for you if you'd like to send an email to the CX Denton's team. Happy to share the template with you. Really just gives you a sense of what is within the template. Obviously connecting your goals, broad yet realistic outcomes, sets the vision, obviously need to be tied to your corporate priorities. So for example, if your company has a goal to increase women and diverse representation in senior leadership positions, maybe an appropriate goal for the legal department might be to develop and deliver a departmental DE&I strategy for the group, right? Your objectives then really describe what actions we'll take, obviously making sure that we follow the SMART methodology there, that when you're considering your objectives. So for example, if you want to refer to that previous goal, maybe a supporting objective might be to develop an outside counsel diversity program to increase supplier diversity by 25% in, let's say, 2023, 24. Timeline, right? Very specific. And of course, we can think, is it Peter Drucker again? What gets measured gets done. So what is success? Let's track and report against that. And of course, having accountabilities as well. One of the benefits I mentioned earlier was using this as a way to build engagement with your team. And this can be, in terms of actually getting some of this stuff done, this can be a welcome opportunity for those on your team who might want to take on a stretch project that might align with their passions. Maybe you've got a paralegal who just loves process improvement, or a legal assistant who wants to create a knowledge management portal, maybe. Thinking about engaging with your team in the most holistic sense. And then if you want to take it a step further, again, as we saw in the ACC matrix, thinking about how do you align your functional goals to their individual performance plans. Also, if there's a great resource, another great resource from the ACC called by Casey Flaherty, who wrote it, called Unless You Ask. And it's a guide to help law departments get more from their law firm relationships. So thinking about what can I do to ask my law firm to support our clients. And certainly in the case of in-house solutions, it's exactly what we do for our clients. So thinking through other success factors, are there interdependencies you need to be aware of? Obviously things like working with finance and procurement, if you're looking at things like your contracting function, thinking about financial impact, again, If you're optimally doing it before your budgeting cycle, if not, think about what can you move forward that requires minimal investment that will have the biggest impact. And of course, this is where that benchmarking data can be really useful. And then finally, the timeline, which is pretty self-evident. So that's a great plan for you to put together for your team, for yourself, to keep track of where you're moving. But that's not the level of detail that you're going to share, obviously, with your CEO or your CFO. So this sample, and we have another cascading plan template we're happy to share. This just gives you a sense of how your goals can cascade from corporate goals, right? So let's talk about one of the corporate goals was revenue growth. What is the goal of the legal department? Obviously, optimizing that contracting function. The legal department is critical to getting that revenue growth, enabling the organizational success, although quite often, and if you haven't, everyone's talking about CLM lately, it's the greatest, everybody's looking to optimize their contracts. The World Commerce and Contracting Association has identified that core contract management process can actually lead up to 9% organizational revenue leakage. That number is probably pretty eye-watering when you think about it. So at this point, particularly in the context of this potential global recession, let's do everything that we can to remove that barrier to future revenue generation. So if you haven't thought about it, it's a great place to start. So as you consider the implementation, it's really helpful to think of this as you would a typical project by thinking through having a project timeline, implementation plan. Think about as well, again, what internal resources do we have access to help support us? Do we have project managers or change management experts sometimes? Thinking through whether or not you need to have another offsite or discussion around the plan, because sometimes you might have discovered a priority that was a really good idea, but once you start walking through what's involved, it fell into that bottom burning lava category in the matrix, the yipes category. So bin it, move on, go back to the original list. Is there something else that makes sense? We talked about change management a little bit throughout this conversation. Obviously, it's critical to successful implementation. The engagement process that you undertake along this way will be a huge stepping stone to creating that urgency and that alignment. So continue with that. And of course, thinking about, using the team to rally for support, to really get excited. I've seen this where people get really excited once they think about how we can optimize the way that we're working. How can we improve the way that we're delivering our services? So thinking about how you can really get the team excited about that. Recognizing again that everybody has too much on their plate, what other tools and resources can be available to you to help support that. And then finally, I'm often asked about clients how they can, again, demonstrate value and alignment to the business. And without question, this process is a really good way to do that. And now, since you've put in the sweat equity and are building a plan and a vision that ultimately reflects corporate strategy and priorities, and understands what your key internal stakeholders need from you, let's use every opportunity to highlight your momentum, right? So let's take a step back. If you think about, so we've got a corporate plan. Most corporations, if not all, will have some kind of marketing and communications plan, right? And as law departments are increasingly asked to, of course, operate like a business within a business, having a marketing plan or communications plan can be a huge advantage for those law departments who really want to highlight their contributions. I was actually working with a law department 4 years ago, I think it was, and we worked with the law department to actually build an internal communication strategy. So helping them to communicate to the business what their success points were, what were their contributions. So there's two ways, obvious ways to report this. And one is, as I described, thinking about building out a communications plan at the functional level. So what are you doing as a team to creatively communicate your success and your progress against your plan? Thinking about whether or not, at its most basic point, having that dashboard, as we saw in the ACC matrix earlier, having that dashboard to report against the KPIs that you established for your leadership is a really obvious and good place to start, right? So obviously making that connection to your leadership and your business units, thinking about having monthly meetings with a quick progress report, updating on, where are we moving forward on some of these top line projects, but thinking about what can you do more broadly across the organization, across all of your customers, not necessarily just the senior internal stakeholders. Do you have a corporate newsletter or maybe even a portal? I actually know that you can use to obviously communicate some of your progress and your success. I know of a legal team that actually issues mini press releases whenever they've had a significant success. A fun way to communicate to the team. You could do podcasts or videos, all sorts of different innovative ways to communicate. I once actually, when I led a team of professionals, there was about 50 members of the team, and we had a strategic plan, we had KPIs, we had reporting. But once I had developed a strategic plan for the year, had an opportunity to communicate this to my internal stakeholders, I held an open house where I ordered drinks and chips or crisps for colleagues to come and hear about what our departmental goals were, how it would support them going forward. And it really was a fantastic networking opportunity to hear from my partners at, at the time leading a function across Dentons, but it was a fantastic networking opportunity. As my internal customers, I wanted to hear what they thought, and I got really live feedback at the same time where we adjust. So the second and other important aspect of communicating this momentum around your plan, which can be often overlooked, is making sure that everyone on your team can really thoughtfully articulate what you were accomplishing as a team and the impact it's having. They are your ambassadors, and they can certainly deliver that message for you. Make sure that they feel empowered to underscore these points at every occasion they have to sell themselves and see the department. There's a whole other conversation around personal branding where these kinds of concepts come into play, but it's really about empowering your team to leverage every opportunity they have to highlight not only their role, but your contributions as a department. So as we close out in our time together, just wanted to hit a couple of top tips for you to take away. I think if anything, the past 2.5 years has taught us is that agility is key. So up there with, the anatomy of a high-performing legal team, agility is obviously critical. You cannot get stuck and just, this is the way we've done things for so long, we must continue to do that. Think about the point I mentioned earlier around connecting with your internal client. Doing so on a regular basis is really important to having that connection and demonstrating that effective collaboration. I used to, when COVID first hit, I created myself a friends and family coffee list of all the people across Dentons and others that I wanted to make sure I connected with on a regular basis. And really using that to be programmatic about it, because if you don't, they might not happen. And again, there could be a project change or delay, but by keeping regular contact with your internal customers, you're going to understand how to better resource manage, how to better manage your programming. And of course, I've mentioned probably too many times, and I really can't underscore it enough, communication is key to change management, key to engagement, key to building your brand and your reputation. But all of this is great, and I just do want to reinforce it's an evolution, it's a journey. Be realistic about what you can do from day one. You're not going to get perfection on day one. Well, you might, hopefully you do, but don't be upset or disappointed if you don't. Doing something is simply better than doing nothing. And certainly having a plan and going through that process, importantly, the process is important. But most importantly, again, data helps to inform that, but don't feel overwhelmed if you don't have access to it. Get what you can and ask for help in getting that information. Ask your law department, or your law firms, ask your network, ask your peers, whatever you can do to help build that information. So I like to stay ruthlessly on time, as Judith and Neve will know. So happy to take any questions if there are any. Welcome that as well. Otherwise, while we wait for any questions in the chat, Judith, I might turn to you to just talk a little bit about the toolkit we mentioned.
Thanks, Joanne. For those of you that would have liked to have joined this time last week, unfortunately, you had a day in Australia to recognise the Queen's passing, Queen Elizabeth II's passing. So it was a national holiday. So we ended up deciding to postpone the slot at this time. We've got a recording, but we're just waiting to get that edited and we'll then send that out. But alongside that, we've created, with the input of General Counsel, a recession planning toolkit with the kinds of slides that Joanne has shared around different matrices that you can use, that you can then edit. So it's a really useful resource, I think, and we've had great feedback from people that have tested it for us so far and given us their views. So if you'd like a copy of that, as with everything, and if you'd like a copy of the slides that Joanne has shared today, please do just email cxprogram@dentons.com and we'll send that on to you. I'll also, please do come off mute if you want to say anything or share a view in the chat, but I'll also just quickly do an advert for our next session, which is on turning a crisis into an opportunity for cultural change. And we're actually being joined by Denton's Global Advisors, who specialise in some of the communications space, to share their experience with you on that session, as well as a Denton's partner. It's as we try to talk about the topics that you care about, but not try and bring a regulatory angle to any of it as such. So it's not a lecture on the law, but more around how we use the crisis to drive your agendas forward within your organisation. So that should be good. So please do come to that as well. Anyone want to say anything or come off mute at this point? Well, if not, then I'd like to say thank you. A big thank you as always to Joanne. Always tons of content, tons of ideas for everybody to take away and think about, and really well prepared and presented. So thank you, Joanne, so much. And everyone, hope to see you again, as I said, next week and in the coming weeks as our sessions for series 2 of the Client Experience Programme roll out. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for joining.